Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, lovely people, depending on where you are watching us from in this beautiful world. And this morning, I am really, really excited about our conversation because I have got Lisa Beam with me. And I saw a I believe it was a LinkedIn post where I saw Lisa commenting, and I thought I have to reach out to this lady, and the rest is history. Here we are, and I am going to get Lisa to introduce herself to our audience. Please welcome Lisa. I'm so glad that you're here with us today.
Oh, my pleasure, Marie. Thank you for inviting me on.
Yeah.
I have a story that I wish wasn't my own. I'm still shocked sometimes that it is my story, but in a nutshell, we lost our 17-year-old daughter in a terrible car accident almost 10 years ago.
Mm.
And as anybody who's grieving can attest to, it is a journey that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. It is, I've worked in oncology for 34
Mm.
years. I work with terminally ill patients. I
Yeah.
have classes, I have conferences I've attended on grief.
Mm.
I thought I knew something about grief
Mm.
until it landed on my own front doorstep. And I realized not only do I not know anything about grief, or at the time I felt like I didn't, but I really became to realize that our society is so terribly ill equipped and awkward when it comes to anything related to grief, death, dying, loss, any of it and all of it.
Yeah. I couldn't
And
agree more.
so, yeah. And in the early days, I struggled to find good resources. Now, in
Mm.
the past 10 years, there's certainly a lot more available, things like your podcast.
Yeah.
But at the time, everything I found just promised a life of doom. It was
Hmm.
dark. Your life is over. Oh, by the way, your marriage is over. Oh, and by the way, your teenage
Yeah.
son, yeah, he's probably going to be hooked on drugs and have mental health problems the rest of his life. People actually said that to me.
That is shocking.
And
Absolutely
I
shocking.
just, I just thought, no,
Mm.
I cannot live the rest of my life. I was 46 years old when my daughter died. I have a
Mm.
lot of longevity in my family, and I thought I cannot live another 46, 50, whatever years that I'm blessed with.
Yeah.
Can't live with that
Yeah.
as being my hope.
And
And
also
so I
that
really,
hanging over your head the entire
oh,
time as this is what I'm walking towards, that is just not on.
yeah.
Let me just put it that
Well,
way. Yeah.
it just, it made me not even want to live anymore if
Mm.
I thought if this is what my future looks like.
Yeah.
And I just made a silent promise to my daughter in heaven and, made it my mission that somehow, some way, maybe I was going to try and change that.
Mm. And boy, you did. I I absolutely love the journey you have taken this on. I don't love obviously how it all started, but I love what you have done with it. And as you know, because you and I had a quick chat before we went live, and I'm so sorry, my cat always wants to be part of this, and you are not the star of the show. I'm sorry. So what I absolutely agree with you is that society is so ill-equipped when it comes to how do we even talk about death, dying, grief, and how do we look at it going forward. And I have been told so many times that grief will always stay with you and grief will always be there. I don't quite agree with that, and I'll also know that your perspective on that might be slightly different to mine, which is absolutely okay. But I would love to hear um, where did you go from that? Because becoming um, hearing, let me put it that way, hearing the news of your daughter's accident and then coming to where you are now, that was a hell of a journey. I would love to hear a little bit about that if that's okay with you, because you started from doom and gloom where the entire world was telling you nothing's going to be great again ever. And you're going to lose your marriage over that, and your son's going to go into drugs. May I just start by saying, how's your son doing now?
I am very happy and proud to say that he's doing fantastic. He was in a very dark and awful place for a couple of years.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I think I shed as many tears over him where he
Mm,
was at, but now he's absolutely fantastic.
I love
Yeah,
that. How
thank
old
you
is
for
he
asking.
now?
He's 25.
Yeah. So he was 2 years younger than your daughter when she passed
Yes,
away. Yeah.
that's right.
And how are you and your husband going?
We're great. You know, it's grief is just such a bizarre thing. I
Mm,
remember at the 6 month mark, I thought,
mm,
no, we're not going to make it. No, we're
yeah.
not. You know, we are very similar in so many different ways. Our
Hmm.
parenting, our ideas around parenting was the same. We're on the same page financially. We're on the same page, with most everything in our lives. I can
Mm,
count the number of arguments we've had on one hand, and
yeah.
they are minor,
Yeah.
minor. So it was so interesting to me that after we lost Katie, our grieving styles were so different.
Mm,
And then our son was another version of different as well.
yeah.
And that was really hard.
Mm,
Um, you asked me kind of what, kind of started the movement out of the doom
hmm.
and gloom.
Yeah.
I don't know how I got there. Don't ask
Mm,
me, but I ended up 2 weeks after Katie died. So this was 4 days before Christmas.
hmm.
I landed at a support group for bereaved moms.
Hmm.
And I think the reason I went is because I knew somebody who was actually a member of that group already. And she invited me.
Hmm.
She said, whenever you can come.
Mm,
And I went. And while it was, as you can imagine, a very solemn group, and
mm,
just about everybody saying, "Oh, I can't stand Christmas. I don't want it. Can we,
yeah.
like, kind of like the Grinch? We've got to
Yeah.
stop Christmas from coming." And I would say that 90% of the group, that was the vibe. But there
Hmm.
were two women there, and I don't even think that they realized that I was eavesdropping on their conversation.
Mm,
And they sat across a very large room from me, and I was leaning in, just listening. And they were 4 and 5 years further into their grief journey than I
mm,
was, but they had both lost teenage daughters as well,
yeah.
one to suicide and one in a car accident as well.
Hmm.
And I just marveled at these two women. First of all, they were all put together. They had makeup on, their hair was done. They had just come from work, which was something that I didn't even think was ever
Yeah.
going to be possible for me. And they were talking like two normal human beings, about work and about what the other
Mm,
kids were doing and Christmas.
yeah.
And I remember the one mom saying, I don't think I can ever do Christmas quite the way we used to because my
Mm,
daughter loved Christmas so much.
yeah.
But my son deserves a good Christmas. So we're going to do it all different. She said,
Mm.
instead of having, the big roast turkey and all of that, we're going to have hot dogs. And
I
instead
love
of
it.
instead of going tobogganing, we're going to go cross country skiing. And instead of opening up our gifts on Christmas morning, we're going to open them up on New Year's Eve. And I remember the other mom looking at her and saying, yeah, I get that. She
Mm,
said, my daughter loved life. She laughed loud. She was the life of the party. She always had fun. And she
mm,
said, I have decided that I want to honor my daughter by living more like her.
mm.
And that short conversation that I heard and seeing that these women just exuded so much hope and
Yeah.
that they were genuinely in a good place, they
Mm,
gave me the hope that I needed. And I started changing my thoughts, changing my words, and I started hanging around with them. I think we've
mhm.
all heard the saying that we are the average of the whatever 5 people or
Five
whatever that
people.
we hang
Yeah.
around with. So, did I want to choose to be around dark people? No. For me, I needed to be with women like that.
Yeah. I love this so much because even when I just listen to you sharing that story, I could feel the hope that these two would have exuded, you know, that just by talking about it um, as their new norm. And I think for me, walking through grief, the biggest thing was that I heard so many people say, my life is not ever going to be the same. And it is true, it won't, you know, but mostly when people say that, it comes from a negative perspective. You know, my life is over or my life is doomed. And that's exactly what you said at the beginning. You know, so many people come from a doom and gloom space when it comes to death, when it comes to grief, and don't really know how to talk about it. And when I hear that, I always say, yeah, you're absolutely right. Life won't ever be the same. How can it? You know, that is such a huge, huge change, to say the least. Change seems such a soft word for what actually happened, but it is a change in circumstances, as neutral as possible. And what you make with that is really up to you. And it takes decisions, you know, it takes the right surroundings, it takes choosing the right people. Who do you want to hang around with? And I could not even talk to people who were in this negative space. I could not even um, handle when people said something negative about our future or the death per se. I needed people that had hope. I needed to be with people that have come into a sort of positive setting, if that makes sense. And you painting that picture so beautifully for us, you know, you eavesdropping on that conversation with the two women, that gave me so much hope, and I wasn't even there. I think we need something like these conversations a lot more. Something that I notice quite intensely in our situation. Our situation is very, very different because in our case, it was my husband that passed suddenly. But the three of us, my two sons and myself, we did things so differently going forward, deliberately, because we wanted to create a new norm. I wanted to create a new norm for them because they were only 10 and 8. They couldn't really think about that in some conscious manner. Um, so creating something that works for us, I think that's the sort of storyline that I can see in your life as well. And I can also relate to what you're saying. The three of you grieved so differently. It was the same in our family. My two sons and I, we grieved so differently. And sometimes I didn't know how to help them in that because they were so polar opposite in how they handled it. And it kept flipping, you know, it was every day was different. How did you get to a point where you could find acceptance in the different way how your husband grieved to how you handled it?
I did a lot of reading. I did a lot of learning. I did a lot of talking to other
Mm,
people who were further into their journey. And I guess I just quickly came to the realization that this was normal. You know, we were
mm,
not some weird anomaly. We
mm,
were just like every other husband and wife, unfortunately, who had lost a child. And that, in fact, I've worked with hundreds, hundreds of grieving mothers. And
yeah.
not a single one has said, oh, yeah, my husband and I were on exactly the same page. We
Mm,
grieved the same.
yeah.
You know, like this is normal. And I think we could line up 1,000 people, men, women,
Hmm.
whatever, and
Yeah.
no two people are going to grieve the same. And so
Mm,
once I made peace with that and recognized that we were, all three of us were grieving
yeah.
the same amount, but we're just different humans. We have different needs, and that actually made my grief journey and our relationships, all three of us, a lot better when we started giving each other grace and started just recognizing,
Mm,
okay, that's your grief and
yeah.
your coping strategies or what have you. This is mine.
Hmm.
And it was, you know, looking back, everything is always so clear, but it almost seemed like we grew
Yeah.
apart
Mm,
for 6, 9 months. And then it was a
hmm.
very slow, gradual coming back together. And I
Hmm.
would say all of the relationships between the three of us are all closer now than they have ever been.
Mm. I would like to ask you something on that. I understand that it might be a little bit confronting, but I really feel I would love to know a little bit more about that, if that's okay. When you said that the three of you sort of drifted apart for 6 to 9 months and then slowly came back together, do you think that maybe that was necessary to have that space for your way of grieving to come out and really live the way that you needed to go through that without the other people interfering or potentially maybe even feeling some sort of judgment on the way that you grieve or something like that? I'm not really sure. How did you experience that from your end? Or, like, hindsight is often a 2020 vision that we don't have in the moment, but how do you feel? Was that?
That's a really, really good question. Nobody's ever asked me that before.
Mm,
Um, I think there's probably a number of things at play. I think that what you said is probably accurate. I think, when something horrific happens to us, we are in that, fight, flight, or freeze. And
mm,
I don't think that we're just in one of those phases
mm.
for a period of time. I think we're
Yeah,
moving between those three things all the time. It's called coping, it's called surviving, right?
yeah.
And you're right. So we do need that space. And I think we were just all in shock, and my personality, I was raised in a house like this, and I think it's fair to say that I'm a fixer by nature. I'm a
Mm,
doer, like,
yeah.
if there's a crack in my wall, I'm going to go out and figure it out how to fix it. I'm going to call somebody to fix it. So I kind of had that same approach with my own grief.
Mm,
Get me the books. I need an appointment with a good grief therapist. I need
yeah.
a grief group. And I was just like all in, right?
Mm,
Not knowing that I couldn't fix it, but also knowing that it was
yeah.
up to me to find the tools and the support and all that.
Yeah.
My husband is definitely a quieter person,
Mm,
very logical in his thinking, and just really became more introverted than he already is,
yeah.
just very, very, very closed off.
Retreat. Yeah.
And my son, who was 15, oh boy, he had two tools in his toolbox.
Hmm.
Being, 15, one was anger and the
Yeah.
other was pot. And it was a terrible
Mm,
combination.
yeah.
Terrible, terrible, terrible combination. And now that he's grown and he's obviously doing really well and left that season behind him,
Hmm.
now we've had some good conversations, and I feel so terrible because I said to him, all I saw was anger and defiance.
Hmm.
But now what I recognize that was is grief.
Yeah.
He just didn't have the skills or the tools or the communication to express that. So it came out
Yeah.
in all kinds of different ways. And I don't know that I was able to give him the best support at the time. I was all about the rules and the boundaries, and because I
Mm,
was so worried about him,
yeah.
I didn't dig into the grief with him.
I think it must be so beautiful. I'm actually having goosebumps just saying that. I think it must be so beautiful to be able to talk to your son about this now, where he's 25 and has got such a different understanding of what happened, and for you to both have your perspectives and be able to share them now. That would be so beautiful, having these conversations.
Yeah. I
Mm,
look at him, 25-year-old young man, and
mm,
he is one of the most emotionally intelligent and compassionate young men.
yeah.
you know and we've talked about resilience a lot, and I said,
Mm,
you've been through some really hard stuff, not just losing your
yeah.
sister, but some other hard stuff too. And I said, you've come out of it. I said, life can continue to throw curveballs at you and you will
Yeah.
always land on your feet because you have
Mm,
the tool.
yes. So differently equipped now. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's incredible. I think it's really beautiful when we, as moms, can look at our kids and say, wow, you've come through this and look at you now. It's
Mhm.
interesting for me to hear you say that, because your son was that age when it happened that my younger son is now.
Right.
He was 8 when his dad passed away. He's 15 now. And my 15 and my 17-year-old, we are having conversations about their differences and how where they came from and how they can walk through that now. We're having these conversations now, and they are so deep and yet so beautiful. And sometimes, yeah, of course, we always sit here wishing that that wouldn't be the initiator, that something so terrible to happen. Yes, it is sad, and I prefer to look at what we did with it because very rarely do we go through such depth and through such transformation without a huge initiator. And yeah, I just choose to look at what is the outcome, what are we doing with that, and I look at your journey, and I hope that doesn't come across the wrong way when I say that, but I am in awe of what you've done with it and how you walk through it, and I can only imagine that being in that journey, in the depth of it, and walking through that, it's almost impossible to be able to see other people's grief for what it is in that moment. I really feel, and that's why I asked you this question about space. I feel this is where society lets us down the most. Nobody has learned how to actually just hold space for people when they are going through something. We always feel we need to say something, we need to give them advice, we need to fix it. Yet mostly people give advice who haven't walked through that journey. And as you said, even if they have, it is so different. And I feel that those who have actually walked their own journey through grief, they understand more than ever to not just give advice, to not try to fix it, to just be there, to just listen, to just sit with people. And that holding space and sitting with people, I feel that is the best thing that people can do. People always ask me, so such and such died, what do I do? And my advice per se is always just sit with them, be there, but like really be there, not just, or tell me when you need anything. That that I know you already, that never works. Tell me if you need anything. Yeah, right. We
Like, I
don't.
know
We
what I need.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I don't even know what I need. So how can
No.
I, yeah. Lisa, I know that you have written a book about your journey. Can you share a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, it all came about in a crazy way. If you would have
Mm.
told me 15 years ago that I would write a book, I would have laughed at you and I'd say I was more likely to scale Mount Everest than write a book. But
Yeah.
um, there came a point in my grief journey, and I remember saying to my husband, I want to write a book. And he said, what
Mm,
on earth are you going to write about? I said, our
mm,
journey, our story.
mm,
He says, who's going to want to read our sad story? And I
mm.
said, I don't know. But, if I can help one person, that's
Yeah.
what I wanted to do. And it actually evolved from a short story that I wrote.
Mm,
I was never a writer. I always did well in English class and so on, but I was never the
mm,
writer. It was always my daughter.
mm.
And I feel in some bizarre way that a lot of my writing has come from her.
Yeah.
Because when I sat down at my computer and wrote the short story, it literally flowed out of me
Mm,
and into my fingers and into my computer. And in minutes, I had this really nice short story.
yeah.
And in a nutshell, the short story is that a man comes to my door one night and he hands me this horrific, awful, big, black, beat up suitcase and he leaves.
Mm,
And this thing weighs a ton and it's horrible and it hurts to carry. And I have to sleep with it and it lays on my chest and I have to take it everywhere with me. And people say, oh my God, why does she have to carry that? That's awful.
mm,
And one day I unzip the corner and I look inside, but it's still really dark and I don't want to open it. And it's really gross inside.
mm,
And then time goes by and I got really brave and I unzipped that whole suitcase and I popped it open. And what was inside was nothing but beauty and love. And it's a metaphor for grief,
mm.
right?
Yeah.
And so that was the short story. And I had written that, gosh, years before the book came to be.
Mhm.
And I had been offered to publish it. I had all kinds of offers. And I said, no, I think this is for something special.
Mm.
And then once I had that kind of travel suitcase metaphor, the journey, right?
Mhm.
Then my whole book is written around the whole concept of a journey. So
Yeah.
it's called Journey to Healing. And
Mhm.
healing is actually an acronym, and it
Mhm.
stands for the 7 things that I think are cornerstones for healing. And I also include 31 little snippets from other grieving moms. They've lost
Mhm.
their children in all different ways. Their children were all different ages. So it
Mhm.
just really, it isn't my story about Katie.
Yeah.
It's woven in there, but it's more of some ideas on how to help ourselves, like little
Mhm.
tiny baby steps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's what we need. Exactly that. People often think that healing looks like this, this big journey, as in, you go away for a couple of weeks and then you come back and you're healed. It
Mhm.
hardly ever works in those big steps. I feel I love giving people tools with those little reframes, like, start using I get to instead of I got to. And those
Mhm.
tiny little things, the way we use language, the way we think and talk about ourselves and grief makes such a massive difference. And I know for a fact, and you mentioned it before, that you have worked with hundreds of moms going through the journey. Is that the work that you do these days? Is that what you offer?
I wear a lot of different hats, Marie.
Hmm.
But I do have a small circle of women that I work with in a group setting.
Yeah,
But these days, a lot of my work is around speaking and facilitating actually to corporations and associations because
beautiful.
folks are starting to finally realize that, to support their employees, or even
Yeah.
more so, the frontline folks, the people who
Mm-hmm.
are firefighters,
Mm-hmm.
police, EMTs, nurses, doctors in the ER
Yeah.
room. I just actually gave a talk to funeral directors, you
Mm.
know, um, that people are realizing that grief burnout is a thing, compassion
Yeah.
fatigue is a thing, and how do
Yeah.
we support these people? So that's what I've been doing a lot of in the last little while.
Hmm. I love that. I absolutely love that. Lisa, for those listening right now and thinking, oh my God, can she come and speak at our facilities, at our company? How can people reach out to you? What's the best way to find and connect with you?
Probably my website is the best place for one-stop shopping.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that is all written out, grief support for
Mm-hmm.
moms.com.
Mm-hmm.
But you'll find a speaking tab on there and
Mm-hmm.
information on how they can reach out and connect with me.
Yeah, we will definitely make sure that we share your website in the show notes below. I can only ever add that after our live interview, so please come back and have a look for that. And Lisa, before I let you go, if there is only one message that you could give any mom listening to that right now who has gone through something similar, I don't ever want to compare it, as we said, the journeys are so different, but somebody who has lost a child and it is early stages of grief, and they are sitting there thinking, great for you, Lisa, but that won't ever happen for me. What would you
Mhm.
like to say to them? Because we've all been there at the early stages where we thought this ain't gonna happen for me.
Yeah,
Mm,
I would say have faith, give yourself grace.
mm,
Grief does change with time. I will never say that time heals all wounds because we all know
yeah.
that that is a big fat lie.
Mm,
But grief does change over time. It softens, it becomes more gentle. But
yeah.
we are really the ones that dictate how that's going to go. And the
Mm,
5 inches between our ears
yeah.
can be a friend or can be a foe. So I would say be a friend to yourself.
Mm,
Reach out in your community, reach out online, find somebody who resonates with you. And
yeah.
even if you're not there yet, have hope. Hope is so
Mm.
important on this journey.
I love that so much what you just said because it really, sorry, it really does fall back to us, the decisions that we make. And that is such a beautiful way to wrap up this conversation. I really want to thank you for that because um, what we make with what we've been given is really up to us. And to find that one or two people that support us on that path, I love what that has done for you, Lisa. It's just so beautiful, and the work that you do is so important. So I just want to say thank you so much for taking time out to be with us here and to share your story and to share hope, because that, I believe, is what we all need the most. And I love that we are having conversations like these today. So thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your story. So much love to you and your family. And this is Lisa and Marie signing off. Bye for now.